In the heart of Mesopotamia, a desolate land flanked by rugged mountains and savage rivers, a civilization was born that never sought peace, but carved its name with the edge of a sword. Unlike its prosperous neighbors, the Assyrian nation was not blessed with rich land or a secure position. They lived along vital trade routes, which made them a prime target for every invader that passed. Their existence was an eternal struggle, a test of endurance that forged them into something terrifying. They learned that to survive, they had to become the greatest predator of all. From this crucible of violence, an idea was born, a principle that would shape their destiny. Power is the only guarantee of existence. They perfected the art of warfare, not as a tool but as an identity. They mastered iron metallurgy, forging swords, shields, and armor that were unmatched in their time. This was not merely technology. It was a revolution that ended the Bronze Age and began the age of Assyrian dominance. From dusty cities like Ashur and Nineveh, they built the most efficient and brutal military machine the world had ever seen. Every Assyrian boy was born to be a soldier. Every Assyrian leader was raised to be a conqueror. They didn't just win battles. They utterly annihilated their enemies, instilling a deep-seated terror in the hearts of all who dared to challenge them. Their reputation preceded them, a shadow that spread across the Middle East, forcing cities to surrender before their army even arrived. They used terror as a tool of diplomacy, cruelty as a form of persuasion. They were an unstoppable force, a wave of will driven by an unwavering belief in their own supremacy. This is the story of how a nation born of desperation became the most powerful empire. An empire built on a foundation of iron and ruled by fear. They were the Assyrian Empire, the world's first war machine. Long before they became an unstoppable force, Assyria was just a simple city kingdom surrounded by greater powers. In the second millennium BCE, they were trapped under the dominance of the Mitanni Empire and forced to pay tribute. This experience shaped their mindset. They knew what it felt like to be ruled, and they swore they would never submit again. They learned from their enemies, adopting new tactics and technologies, and waited for the right moment to rise. Early kings like Adad-nirari I and Shalmaneser I were the architects of this revival. They were not merely kings, they were visionary warlords. They began to expand Assyria's territory, not through massive conquests, but through a series of relentless campaigns to secure their borders and build the foundation for a greater power. They established an organized and disciplined army, developed effective battle formations, and most importantly, perfected the use of the war chariot. Horses and chariots became the backbone of their army, providing a lethal combination of speed and power on the battlefield. They mastered the art of siegecraft, building siege towers, battering rams and tunnels to breach even the most formidable city walls of their enemies. But they were still a regional power. Their dominance was not universal. They faced fierce resistance from the Hittites, the Arameans, and other regional entities. They often retreated, suffered defeats, but every loss only strengthened their resolve. This was a slow and painful learning period, a time when a future empire was being forged in the fire of conflict. They were building not just an army, but a system of conquest, a mechanism that, once perfected, would change the face of the Middle East forever. The core of the Assyrian Empire was not just its brutal military might, but also a clever and ruthless system of governance designed to eternalize their power. The city of Ashur, dedicated to their chief war god, also named Ashur, was their spiritual heart. The Assyrian king was not just a ruler, he was the high priest of the god Ashur, the supreme military and religious leader, and the god's representative on earth. The king held absolute power, supported by a highly efficient bureaucracy that meticulously documented every detail of the empire. They maintained vast libraries, including the royal archives in Nineveh, which contained thousands of cuneiform tablets recording their history, laws, and knowledge. But their methods for maintaining order were as terrifying as their methods for conquering. The Assyrians were masters of psychological warfare. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they broke their will to resist. Practices like mass deportations, where the entire populations of conquered cities were moved thousands of miles away, were a primary tool of their control. This was not just punishment, it was a way to shatter the identity and social cohesion of the conquered nations, making it impossible for them to rebel. Their own royal records proudly told of cities being razed, wells being poisoned, and piles of skulls being erected at city gates. This cruelty was deliberate. a message intended to create such immense fear that the mere idea of defying Assyria would make enemies tremble. They didn't just want obedience, they wanted total submission, and they got it. With a combination of military force, organized governance, and deliberate terror, the Assyrians built a foundation of power that felt unshakable. This was the zenith of Assyrian power. In the first millennium BCE, the new Assyrian Empire rose under legendary kings, and they knew no bounds. Tiglath-Pileser III reformed the army, creating an unstoppable war machine. He was the inventor of the professional standing army, a force that was always ready for war. Their chariots were replaced by swift armored cavalry, a force capable of striking with unprecedented speed and power. They perfected their siege tactics to an unreal level, capable of tearing down the most formidable city walls with movable siege towers and clever tunneling tactics. Under kings like Sennacherib and Sargon II, the empire expanded in every direction. They conquered Babylonia, seized Damascus, and occupied vital territories in the Levant and Egypt. Every new conquest added wealth and resources to their treasury, but also added new enemies to their long list. Yet nothing could stop them. Nineveh, the new capital of the empire, became the largest and most magnificent city in the world, an unmatched center of power with opulent palaces, hanging gardens, and an impressive network of canals. Ashurbanipal, their last great king, took the empire to an even higher peak. He was not only a capable warlord but also a scholar. He built the great library in Nineveh, collecting thousands of cuneiform texts from all over Mesopotamia. This library, containing epics, laws, and scientific texts, was a testament to a surprising cultural side of Assyria, a stark contrast to their brutal reputation. However, beneath this glory, the empire was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Constant conquest had stretched their resources to the limit. The conquered peoples, stripped of their identity and homeland, grew increasingly restless. This immense empire had too many enemies and too few friends. With every victory, they came closer to their own destruction. The Iron Empire had forged itself into a weapon so powerful, it could no longer tell the difference between its enemies and itself. Beneath the facade of unrivaled power and glory, the Assyrian Empire began to rot from within. The very issues that had propelled them to superpower status were now becoming their fatal flaws. First, there was the unbearable burden of administering such a vast empire. Managing a territory that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf required immense human and military resources. Their army, though professional, was constantly deployed to put down rebellions in one region while another military campaign was being launched in the opposite. This was an exhausting cycle that was gradually draining their strength. Second, there was the failure to integrate their conquered peoples. Instead of building loyalty, the Assyrians built fear. The practices of deportation and brutality created a deep-seated hatred among nations like the Babylonians and the Elamites, who harbored grudges for generations. These nations waited for the right moment, for the Assyrian Empire to show a sign of weakness, to rise up in rebellion. Each uprising required a massive deployment of troops, which diverted attention from greater threats on the borders. Third, there was a shift in power on the frontiers. To the north and east, a new powerful force, the Medes, was rising. They were well organized, strong, and held their own grudges against the Assyrian Empire. To the south, the city of Babylon, which had been destroyed and rebuilt by the Assyrians countless times, was now led by an ambitious king named Nabopolassar. He was a strategist who saw the Assyrian weaknesses and swore to end their dominance. The Assyrians, who were so used to dealing with isolated enemies, now found themselves facing a united front. They were still winning battles, but their collapse was no longer avoidable. The power they had built was so immense that they could no longer contain it. The final blow came with a speed and destructiveness that was stunning. The Iron Empire, which had long been considered invincible, was showing signs of collapse. Under the leadership of a weak Assyrian king, internal strife erupted. This was the signal their enemies had been waiting for. Nabopolassar of Babylon forged an alliance with the Medes under King Cyaxares. Together they formed an unparalleled combined force united by a single goal: to destroy the Assyrian Empire forever. The first attacks targeted Assyrian cities in the north, and then they turned their attention to the heart of the empire. In 614 BCE, the holy city of Ashur was besieged and destroyed. News of the holy city's fall spread like wildfire. signaling that nothing was sacred from the wrath of Assyria's enemies. 2 years later, in 612 BCE, the combined Babylonian and Median army arrived at the gates of Nineveh, the unmatched capital. For 3 months, they laid siege to the city, whose walls were thought to be impenetrable, but their enemies had learned their own siege tactics. After heavy rain softened the ground, Nineveh's magnificent walls finally crumbled. Tales from the event speak of unimaginable slaughter and destruction. Nineveh was utterly razed, burned to the ground, and plundered until nothing was left. The last Assyrian king, Sinsharishkun, is believed to have died in the flames of his palace. The power that had ruled the Middle East for centuries vanished in a matter of years. The empire that had taken so much pride in its brutality finally met an equally brutal end. It was the end of an era, and the world would never be the same again. The ashes of their cities have long settled beneath the Mesopotamian desert, and their history was almost completely lost. For centuries, little remained of the Assyrian Empire. Nineveh, their magnificent capital, became a forgotten mound of ruins. Yet their story was not completely gone. Through the cuneiform tablets of Ashurbanipal's library, we have rediscovered the tale of an empire so mighty and so cruel. Their legacy extends far beyond their collapse. The Assyrians were the first to create a professional standing army, an idea that would become a model for future empires. They were the first to create a unified empire, a blueprint for the coming Persian and Roman empires. But they also taught a profound lesson. Terror may unite an empire for a time, but only justice can make it eternal. The cruelty they inflicted became a weapon for their enemies, who eventually rose to demand retribution. The story of the Assyrian nation is a tale of boundless ambition, of a power forged in the fire of suffering. It is a story of how brutality can bring glory, but also an inevitable ruin. They rose from the mud to dominate the world, and then disappeared back into the dust, leaving behind a timeless question. Can a power built on fear last forever? Their story is a reflection of humanity's failure to find a balance between might and humanity. Did this epic story leave you hungry for more tales from the past? Do you want to explore other civilizations that rose and fell in history? Don't miss our next story. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our saga of world history. Join us as we dig deeper into the past, uncover forgotten stories, and reveal the secrets that shaped our world.